The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the isolated asphalt of rural Georgia, turning the road into a shimmering river of suffocating heat. The air was thick, heavy, and silent, broken only by the relentless buzzing of cicadas that sounded like a funeral dirge for the tragedy unfolding on the shoulder. It was a place where hope usually goes to die, surrounded by towering pine trees that stood like silent sentinels over a heartbreaking scene. On this lonely stretch of highway, the world seemed to have stopped turning, holding its breath as a golden angel faced the darkest moment of her existence. Sadie, a golden retriever with eyes that usually held the warmth of 1,000 suns, was now a portrait of agonizing despair. Her once lustrous golden coat was matted with grimy road dust and dried blood, evidence of the violence that had shattered her world just hours before. She stood guard over the deep drainage ditch, her body trembling not from the pain in her own limping leg, but from a terror that froze her motherly heart. Down in that grassy abyss lay her entire universe. 3 tiny, helpless puppies, struck down by a monster who didn't even tap the brakes. 2 of the small, fluffy bodies were terrifyingly still, silenced by the cruel impact of a stranger's indifference. But there was still a faint, whimpering cry rising from the shadows of the ditch, a sound so weak it would have been lost to the wind if not for a mother's desperate ears. Sadie paced frantically between the ditch and the white line of the road, her breaths coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She looked up at the sky, her brown eyes filling with tears, seemingly begging God for a miracle, for just one soul to stop and care before the heat claimed what little life was left. Cars zoomed past at breakneck speeds, blurring into streaks of metal and noise, their drivers oblivious to the life-and-death drama playing out mere feet away. Each passing vehicle felt like a fresh slap to Sadie's face, a reminder of the invisible villain of human cruelty that had left her family broken on the roadside. She barked, but her voice was hoarse and cracked from hours of crying out for help that never came. The vibration of the engines terrified her, yet she knew that the very machines that had caused this nightmare were also her only hope for salvation. Driven by a love that transcended instinct, Sadie made a decision that defied all survival logic. She limped painfully toward the center of the lane, positioning her battered body directly in the path of the oncoming traffic. She lowered her head, flattening her ears against her skull, and stared down the highway with a gaze of absolute surrender. She was willing to die right there on the burning asphalt if it meant forcing anyone to look at the tragedy in the ditch. It was a suicide mission, born of pure, sacrificial motherly love. Make sure to subscribe to our channel right now as we follow this heartbreaking journey. Can you imagine the desperation of a mother willing to sacrifice her own life for her babies? Send a silent prayer for this brave angel in the comments below. She is going to need every ounce of spiritual support to get through the next hour. In the distance, the rumble of a heavy work truck grew louder, cutting through the humid air. Inside sat Hank, a 55-year-old electrician whose face was etched with the lines of a hard life and exhaustion. He was covered in grease and sweat, his mind focused solely on the comfort of his recliner and the silence of his empty house after a grueling 14-hour shift. He wasn't looking for trouble, and he certainly wasn't looking for a cause. He was just a tired man wanting to get home. But as his tired eyes scanned the horizon, he saw the golden silhouette standing unmoving in his lane. Hank slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in protest against the hot pavement, the smell of burnt rubber filling the air. The heavy truck shuddered to a halt, just feet from Sadie's nose. Unlike the others, she didn't flinch, she didn't run. She simply looked up at him through the windshield, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that pierced straight through the glass and into his soul. It wasn't a look of aggression, it was a conversation between 2 souls. "Please," her eyes seemed to scream, "I don't have anyone else." Hank killed the engine and opened the heavy door, stepping out into the oppressive heat with a groan of fatigue. He expected the dog to bolt, to run into the woods as most strays did. But Sadie did the impossible. She rushed toward him, ignoring her limp, and gently took his grease-stained hand into her mouth. She didn't bite. She held him with a tenderness that broke his heart instantly. Whimpering softly, she tugged him, pulling this stranger toward the edge of the road, her tail tucked low in submission and fear. "What is it, girl? What's wrong?" Hank muttered, his voice rough but kind, as he allowed himself to be. Led by this desperate creature, He saw the blood on her flank and felt a surge of anger toward whoever had hurt her, but he didn't know the half of it yet. Sadie released his hand at the edge of the steep embankment and dropped to her belly, pointing her snout down into the tall, overgrown weeds. She let out a howl so sorrowful, so full of grief, that it made the hair on Hank's arms stand up despite the heat. Hank slid down the embankment, his boots sinking into the mud, and parted the thick brush with his calloused hands. What he saw made his stomach turn and his fists clench in righteous fury. There, hidden among the trash and weeds, was the aftermath of a massacre. The two motionless puppies lay like discarded toys, but beneath a shattered piece of plastic car bumper, a tiny chest was still heaving. A single puppy was fighting for every breath, pinned and helpless, while ants began to crawl nearby. The realization hit Hank like a physical blow. This wasn't just a stray dog. This was a mother who had orchestrated a rescue mission for her last surviving child. The invisible villain, the monster who had done this and driven away, had left them to a slow, agonizing death in the heat. But they hadn't counted on Sadie's resolve. Hank looked back up at the mother dog, who was now watching him with a mixture of terror and hope, shaking uncontrollably. She had done her part. Now the impossible weight of the rescue rested entirely on his tired shoulders. The situation is critical, and we don't know if the little one is going to make it. If you love animals, please hit the like button to send strength to Hank and Sadie. May God bless every person who stops to help a suffering soul. Stay with us. The rescue is just beginning. Hank stared down into the muddy abyss, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The situation was far worse than it looked from the road. The sharp, jagged edge of the plastic bumper was acting like a guillotine blade, pressed dangerously close to the puppy's neck. The ground beneath the debris was unstable, a mix of loose gravel and soft clay that threatened to collapse with the slightest movement. One wrong move, one slip of his hand, and the heavy plastic would crush the remaining life out of the tiny creature. It was a deadly puzzle where the price of failure was an innocent soul. Sadie, sensing Hank's hesitation, couldn't contain her maternal panic. She leaped into the ditch beside him, her paws scrabbling frantically at the dirt, trying to dig her baby out with brute force. In her desperation, her sharp claws grazed the puppy's already wounded flank, eliciting a sharp, agonizing squeal that pierced the humid air like a siren. Hank gasped, realizing that her love was becoming dangerous. The mother was so traumatized, she was inadvertently hurting the very thing she was trying to save, adding a layer of chaotic tension to an already delicate operation. "Easy, Mama. Easy," Hank commanded, his voice firm but laced with compassion, as he gently used his forearm to block Sadie's frantic digging. He needed her to trust him, to surrender control, which is the hardest thing for a mother to do when her child is dying. Sadie looked at him, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and confusion. For a heartbreaking second she bared her teeth, not in aggression, but in pure instinctual defense, before collapsing back onto her haunches, trembling violently. She understood. She had to. Let the stranger take over. As if the situation wasn't dire enough, the sky above suddenly turned a bruising shade of purple. The heavy, stifling heat broke with a violent crack of thunder that shook the ground, signaling the arrival of a sudden summer storm. Fat, cold raindrops began to pelt down, instantly turning the dust of the road into a slick, treacherous slime. The abstract villain of nature had arrived to claim its prize. The ditch began to fill with runoff water, the mud rising ominously around the trapped puppy's nose. Time wasn't just running out, it was being washed away. Hank knew he couldn't lift the debris with his bare hands without risking a shift in weight that would be fatal. He scrambled up the slippery embankment, his boots losing traction in the gathering mud, and sprinted to his truck. He grabbed his heavy-duty hydraulic jack, a cold steel tool meant for lifting tons of metal, now destined for a surgical operation on a fragile life. He grabbed a handful of dry rags and a flashlight, his mind racing. Every second he spent away from the ditch, the water level rose higher. Back in the ditch, the scene was chaotic. The rain was now a torrential downpour, blinding Hank and soaking Sadie to the bone. The water was lapping at the puppy's chin, and the little one had stopped struggling, entering a state of hypothermic shock. Hank jammed the base of the jack into the mud, praying it would find purchase on a hidden rock. He positioned the lifting arm. Under the edge of the bumper, his movements precise despite his shaking hands. He was fighting physics, weather and death all at once. He began to crank the handle. Click, click, click. The sound was mechanical and cold against the backdrop of the storm. The heavy plastic groaned and shifted, lifting mere millimeters at a time. Sadie watched the metal beast with suspicion, letting out a low whine every time the debris moved. Hank held his breath, sweat mixing with rain on his face. "Come on. Little buddy, hang in there," he whispered, his voice cracking. Suddenly, the jack slipped slightly in the mud, the bumper jolting downward. Hank threw his own hand in the gap, acting as a human wedge, screaming in pain as the sharp plastic bit into his wrist. He ignored the blood trickling down his arm and used the leverage to shove the debris aside with a roar of adrenaline-fueled strength. The trap was sprung. The puppy was free, but there was no celebration, no movement from the small, muddy form half buried in the sludge. Hank scooped up the tiny body. It was terrifyingly limp like a wet rag doll. The puppy's head lolled back, eyes closed, mouth open and full of muddy water. The silence that followed was louder than the thunder overhead. "No, no, no, you don't quit on me now," Hank yelled, panic finally seizing his voice. He scrambled out of the ditch, cradling the puppy against his chest to shield it from the rain, Sadie nipping at his heels in a frenzy. He laid the lifeless bundle on the tailgate of his truck. The puppy wasn't breathing. The cold grip of death had seemingly already won. Hank looked at Sadie, who froze, sensing the absolute worst. Her tail stopped wagging. She let out a sound that wasn't a bark, but a sob of pure devastation. Hank didn't give up. His large, calloused hands, accustomed to twisting thick wires and gripping heavy tools, now performed the most delicate dance of his life. He used his thumbs to begin tiny, rhythmic compressions on the puppy's chest. 1, 2, 3, breathe. He covered the puppy's entire muzzle with his mouth, blowing gentle puffs of air into the tiny lungs, tasting the mud and the copper tang of blood. He was breathing his own life force into the creature, defying the reaper with every exhale. Minutes felt like hours. The rain plastered Hank's hair to his forehead. Sadie, seeing the man fighting so hard for her baby, did something that marked the turning point of their souls. She stopped pacing. She stopped crying. She walked up to Hank, rested her heavy, wet head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. It was total surrender. She was placing her entire world in his hands, trusting him to be the miracle she had prayed for. The bond was sealed in that moment of shared desperation. Then, a miracle cut through the sound of the rain. A tiny, raspy cough erupted from the tailgate. The puppy's body jerked, expelling water, and drew in a ragged, wheezing breath. It was the sweetest sound Hank had ever heard. The little chest began to rise and fall on its own, weak but undeniable. He's back, girl," Hank cried out, tears of relief mingling with the rain on his cheeks. Sadie licked the puppy's face frantically, her tail thumping a weak rhythm against the metal truck. But the victory was fragile. The puppy was shivering violently, its gums pale, its breathing labored and crackling with fluid. The rescue mission had succeeded, but the war for life was far from over. Hank wrapped the soaking wet puppy in the dry rags he had brought, tucking the bundle inside his jacket against his body heat. He ushered Sadie into the passenger seat of the truck, her wet fur instantly steaming up the windows. As Hank slammed the driver's side door and gunned the engine, he looked over at his new passengers. Sadie was curled up on the seat, her eyes glued to the lump in Hank's jacket. They were safe from the storm, but as Hank looked at the puppy's glazed eyes, a cold knot of dread tightened in his stomach. The nearest vet was 30 minutes away, and the little one was fading in and out of consciousness. The hardest part wasn't the ditch or the storm. It was going to be keeping this angel alive long enough to get help. This little angel is fighting for every single breath right now. Are you rooting for him to survive? Your like helps us save more lives like this. Subscribe to support our mission. Now let's see if he can survive the ride to the clinic. The old pickup truck roared down the highway like a missile, the engine straining against the red line, as Hank wove through traffic with the desperation of a father saving his own child. Inside the cab, the air was thick with the metallic smell of fear. The puppy, wrapped tightly in Hank's jacket, was burning up, his tiny body trembling with a fever that seemed to radiate through the thick fabric. Hank kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other gently pressed against the small chest, terrified that the faint, rhythmic thumping of the heart would stop at any second. Sadie sat rigid on the passenger seat, her eyes fixed on the bundle in Hank's lap, unblinking and wide with a haunting intelligence. She didn't bark. She didn't whine. She just watched, her breathing synchronized with the labored gasps of her baby. Every time the truck hit a bump, she flinched, instinctively reaching out a paw to steady the bundle. It was a silent vigil of pure agony. She knew, with a mother's ancient instinct, that the shadow of death was sitting right there in the cab with them, waiting for a chance to strike. They screeched into the parking lot of the emergency veterinary clinic, the tires smoking as Hank threw the truck into park before it had even fully stopped. He scooped up the bundle and burst through the glass doors, shouting for help with a voice that cracked with emotion. "Help! I need a doctor now. He's barely breathing." The receptionists, used to emergencies, but startled by the raw intensity of this burly man in dirty work clothes, immediately sprang into action. A team of scrubs descended on them, taking the limp puppy from Hank's trembling arms. Dr. Evans, a veteran veterinarian with eyes that had seen too much sorrow, took one look at the puppy's pale gums and shallow breathing and shouted a code blue. "We have severe hypothermia and aspiration pneumonia. Get him to trauma, stat." The energy in the room shifted from chaotic to surgically precise. As they rushed the puppy through the double doors, Sadie tried to follow, letting out a sharp, panicked bark. A nurse gently held her back, but Sadie's eyes followed her baby until the doors swung shut, cutting the visual cord between mother and child. Hank collapsed onto a hard plastic chair in the waiting room, his adrenaline crashing, leaving him shaking and covered in dried mud and sweat. The silence of the clinic was deafening compared to the storm outside. He stared at his hands, the hands that fixed power lines, that brought light to darkness, feeling utterly useless. Behind those double doors, science was battling fate, and all he could do was grip his wooden rosary and whisper pleas to the ceiling. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into an eternity of not knowing. Minutes turned into an hour before Dr. Evans emerged, her face grave and unreadable. She sat next to Hank, her voice low. "It's not good, Hank. He has 2 broken ribs from the impact, and his lungs are filled with fluid. His body temperature is critically low. We're doing everything we can, but his heart is under immense strain. The next few hours will determine if he has the strength to stay with us." The words hung in the air like heavy stones. The abstract villain was now internal trauma, a silent killer that no wrench or jack could fix. Inside the trauma room, the battle was reaching a fever pitch. The puppy, whom the staff had tentatively named Soldier for his fighting spirit, was hooked up to monitors that beeped a frantic rhythm. He lay on a heating pad, tubes running into his tiny veins, looking impossibly small against the stainless steel table. Suddenly, the steady beep of the heart monitor turned into a long, shrill whine. Flatline. The tiny heart, exhausted by the cold and the trauma, had simply given up. The room exploded into controlled chaos. "He's arresting! Push 1 milligram of epinephrine, now!" Dr. Evans commanded, her hands moving instantly to start chest compressions on the fragile rib cage. It was a moment of absolute terror. The puppy's body was limp, bouncing rhythmically with the force of the CPR. Outside, in the kennel area where they had placed Sadie to rest, she suddenly stood up and let out a single, piercing howl that echoed through the building. She knew. Somehow, through the walls and the distance, she felt the life force of her child flickering out. The vet didn't stop. "Come on, Soldier. Don't you dare leave her alone," she whispered fiercely, pumping the tiny chest. Seconds ticked by, 10, 20, 30. The line on the monitor remained a flat green horizon of death. The nurses exchanged glances, ready to call the time of death. But then a jagged spike appeared on the screen, then another. Beep, beep. A collective breath was released in the room. The heart had restarted, weak and thready, but beating. It was a defiance of medical probability, a testament to a will to live that defied science. But the danger was far from over. The puppy was placed in an oxygen tent, a clear plastic box that hummed softly, pumping warm, oxygen-rich air into his damaged lungs. He was in a coma-like state, hovering between worlds. The staff dimmed the lights, leaving him to fight his internal war in the quiet hum of machinery. Outside in the waiting room, Hank refused to go home. He slept sitting up, his head back against the wall, refusing to abandon the two souls who had crashed into his life. He was their anchor, their witness. The night dragged on, a grueling test of endurance. Inside the kennel, Sadie paced relentlessly, refusing food or water. She pressed her nose against the metal bars, sniffing the air, tracking the scent of medicines and disinfectants, searching for the smell of her baby. Every time a technician walked past, she wagged her tail tentatively, her eyes asking the question she couldn't speak. Is he alive? Her maternal torture was a palpable force in the clinic, softening the hearts of even the most hardened staff members. Just before dawn, the crisis peaked again. The puppy's temperature spiked, a fever burning through him as his body fought off the infection in his lungs. He thrashed weakly in the oxygen tent, letting out small, distressed squeaks. A nurse sat by his side, stroking his head through the specialized gloves of the incubator, whispering soothing words. "Fight, little one. Your mama is waiting." As the sun began to crest over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the fever finally broke. The puppy fell into a deep, natural sleep, his breathing deepening and slowing into a steady rhythm. When Dr. Evans walked into the waiting room at 7 a.m., Hank jumped to his feet, his eyes bloodshot and fearful. The vet didn't say a word at first. She just smiled, a tired, genuine smile of victory. "He made it, Hank. The fluid is clearing up, and his vitals are stable. He's a fighter like I've never seen. I think he's ready to see his mum." Hank let out a breath he felt, like he'd been holding for 12 hours, tears of sheer exhaustion and joy welling up in his eyes. The weight of the world lifted instantly. They led Hank back to the recovery area. Dr. Evans opened the kennel door for Sadie, putting a leash on her. Sadie didn't pull or run. She walked with a dignified urgency, her nose twitching. They led her to the oxygen tent where Soldier was sleeping. Sadie stood on her hind legs, placing her front paws on the table, and looked through the clear plastic. Inside, the puppy sensed her presence. His eyes fluttered open, groggy but clear, and he let out a soft, recognizing yip. The reunion was a moment of pure, unadulterated grace. The vet opened the tent just enough for Sadie to poke her head in. She didn't lick him frantically this time. She was gentle, reverent. She sniffed his face, inhaling the scent of life, and then licked his ear once, a seal of safety. The puppy leaned into her touch, closing his eyes in bliss. Hank stood in the doorway, watching the scene through a blur of tears. Justice had been served. Death had tried to take the innocent, but love, stubborn, refusing, powerful love, had stood in the way and won. The medical crisis had passed, leaving behind a bond forged in fire. But as Hank looked at the battered pair, Sadie with her limp and the puppy with his bandaged ribs, he knew the journey wasn't quite finished. They were alive, yes, but they were homeless, broken, and recovering. The glow-up was yet to come, but now the steady beep of the monitor was the most beautiful music in the world. The sun was fully up now, shining through the clinic blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny angels celebrating the victory. Did you hold your breath when his heart stopped? We are all in tears here. Soldier is a true miracle. If you believe every animal deserves a chance to fight for their life, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us pay for these life-saving surgeries. Now, get your tissues ready for the most beautiful transformation you have ever seen. 6 weeks have passed since that stormy night in the clinic, and if you walked onto Hank's property today, you wouldn't believe your eyes. The atmosphere of death and desperation has completely evaporated, replaced by the golden warmth of a Georgia summer evening. The glow-up is nothing short of miraculous. The dusty, blood-stained creatures that were pulled from the ditch are gone. In their place are two radiant souls who seem to shine from the inside out. The transformation began with a spa day that marked the official start of their new lives, washing away the last remnants of their traumatic past. Sadie is now absolutely unrecognizable. Her coat, once matted with mud and motor oil, has grown back thick, lustrous, and soft as silk, shimmering like spun gold in the sunlight. A nutritious diet and weeks of medicated baths have healed her skin completely. She no longer walks with a limp. She trots with the regal grace of a queen surveying her kingdom. But the biggest change is in her eyes. The haunted, pleading look of a mother fearing for her child is gone, replaced by a sparkling, relaxed gaze of pure contentment. She carries her head high, her tail waving like a flag of victory with every step she takes. And then there is the puppy, who has officially graduated from the name Soldier to Lucky. He is a bundle of chaotic, joyful energy that refuses to sit still. The ribs that were once broken are now strong, protecting a heart that beats with the rhythm of pure happiness. He doesn't just run, he bounces across the grass like a rubber ball, his oversized paws tripping over themselves in his eagerness to chase butterflies. It is impossible to look at him and see the dying, gasping creature on the tailgate. He is the definition of life reclaiming its territory, a furry testament to the power of second chances. The daily routine at the farm has become a ritual of love. Every morning starts with what Hank calls the breakfast of champions. No longer scavenging for scraps in roadside ditches, Sadie and Lucky dance impatiently around their ceramic bowls as Hank fills them with high-quality kibble mixed with warm broth. They eat with gusto, but without the frantic speed of starvation. They know deep in their bones that the food will always be there. Watching them eat until their bellies are full is a therapy all its own for Hank, erasing the memory of their rib cages, showing through their skin. Lucky has discovered the magic of toys. His favorite is a squeaky rubber chicken that he carries everywhere, treating it with more care than the world ever treated him. He engages Hank in epic games of tug-of-war, growling ferociously with his tail wagging so hard his entire back half wiggles. Sadie watches these games from the porch, offering a soft woof of encouragement. She has rediscovered her own inner puppy too. Occasionally she joins in, gently wrestling with Lucky, teaching him manners while showering him with affectionate licks. The sound of play has replaced the silence of Hank's lonely life. Hank, the hero of our story, has undergone a transformation just as profound as the dog's. The exhaustion and solitude that seemed to weigh him down in the first act have lifted. He comes home from work not to an empty, silent house, but to a greeting committee that celebrates his arrival as if he were a returning king. He spends his evenings brushing Sadie's long fur, a meditative practice that lowers his blood pressure and fills his heart. He realizes now that he didn't just save them. In a very real way, they saved him from a life of grey monotony. There was a moment around week 4 when Hank looked at the adoption applications piling up on his kitchen table. People wanted the miracle dogs. But as he watched Lucky asleep on his boots and Sadie resting her head on his knee, Hank knew he couldn't do it. He crumpled the papers and threw them in the trash. They were already home. The invisible villain who abandoned them had unwittingly created a family that no force on earth could separate. The cruelty of one human was defeated by the stubborn love of another. The final scene takes us to the wooden porch of the farmhouse at sunset. The sky is painted in hues of purple and orange, mirroring the storm that brought them together, but this time, the air is peaceful. Hank sits in his rocking chair, the Bible open on his lap, but his eyes are on his dogs. Lucky is sprawled out on his back, legs in the air completely exposing his belly, the ultimate sign of trust. Sadie sits beside Hank's chair, her shoulder pressed firmly against his leg, acting as his eternal guardian. The camera pans in on Sadie's face as the sun dips below the horizon. She looks out over the driveway toward the road where she once begged for her life. There is no fear left, only a profound sense of peace. She turns her head and licks Hank's hand, the same hand that dug her baby out of the mud. It is a silent thank you that echoes louder than any words. The screen fades to black on this tableau of perfect, hard-won love, leaving the audience with the undeniable truth that kindness is the most powerful force in the universe. This is the happy ending every animal deserves, but we have to ask, the person who abandoned this mother and her babies on the road, do they deserve forgiveness or should they face justice? Tell us your honest opinion in the comments below. If you believe that every dog deserves a loving home like Hank's, smash that like button right now. Comment Amen to bless Sadie, Lucky, and Hank in their new life together.